Directed by Victor Dahl, we are talking Watch the Skies, also known as UFO Sweden. And yes, this is actually a Swedish movie, but we'll touch on that again in just a second. And in a nutshell, I would say this is a kind of a heady mix between the X-Files, Interstellar, and a touch of Stranger Things. So yes, this is actually a Swedish movie that is a new AI technology which lip syncs the actual actors. So it lip syncs in English. So you can actually watch this with a kind of an English spoken language, and it looks like our actors are speaking in English, but it's actually achieved with AI and newly recorded English dialogue. So you'll kind of, yes, this is a Swedish movie originally filmed in Swedish language, but with this new technology, you can kind of watch it and experience it in English without sort of it being that kind of awkward dubbed sort of situation, but it does look very naturalistic. And I think the reason for this is this movie is clearly influenced by American culture and sort of science fiction movies. So, you know, it actually, after a while, you'll kind of forget this is even kind of a thing. So the technology is very, actually, you know, quite impressive, I've got to say. But what's the story all about? What is this movie's plot? So it focuses on this young woman called Denise, who is a teenager in the mid-90s, whose father was a kind of like a scientist that's belonged to this kind of UFO association, and he's gone kind of missing in mysterious circumstances when she was a young girl, and she dreams of trying to find out what has happened. And there is some kind of science fiction phenomena, shall we say, that sets her on this path, and she ends up kind of encountering this kind of UFO association, who is a kind of small group of quirky characters who investigate, you know, strange phenomena. The truth is out there and all that. And together they go on a kind of a quest, I guess you would say, to try and find out what's happened. Is the UFOs involved? What has happened to the father? Is there some type of, you know, natural scientific phenomena which is kind of happening all around them? And they are pursued by kind of rival scientists, the police. What'll happen? You'll have to watch the movie and find out. So yes, despite this being a Swedish movie, that is very much an American style of film, and it is kind of a throwback film in some ways, and feels like a movie around about the time when it was set in the kind of the mid-90s in some respects. It has that sort of you know, a group of kind of misfits going on a kind of adventure, kind of getting out of their depth, coming across some adversity, and eventually kind of like, you know, verging on discovery. It's almost a little bit like kind of like a Goonies style adventure in a way, but with less kids. So it definitely has a kind of a throwback feel to it. So if you were a fan of that sort of style of, you know, in the 90s there was this big sort of UFO craze, I mean, primarily I would say caused by the X-Files, but also there's various other kind of films, and that it kind of harkens back to that sort of time, really, I would suggest. So yeah, it definitely, if you like a little bit of a kind of a retro feel to your movies, then I would suggest checking this one out. And it's actually quite a reasonable production value here. It's quite a nice, polished movie. You know, it's a science fiction movie, but it's not going massively out there. And this does feel like, as much as they kind of, if you've ever seen the X-Files movies, you know, they're not a grand departure from the X-Files TV series, and this would feel right at home as a kind of X-Files kind of style episode or movie or something. So it's not like aliens and things like that, or an invasion movie or anything like this. This is more about sort of grand science fiction ideals. As I've mentioned, I think probably the closest one is something along the lines of maybe an Interstellar, but with that kind of quirkiness that, you know, from Stranger Things and kind of the X-Files. So, but it is very kind of well produced. There's some neat sort of atmospheric kind of VFX and some kind of set pieces and things, and you know, a ticking clock sort of element to it. Our characters, they're a bit of a mixed bag, if I'm honest. We'll come on to the negatives in a little bit, but there are some kind of like characters that I did sort of gravitate to. Certainly the kind of like the main guy in this sort of UFO group is quite a sort of sympathetic sort of character, and you know, a sort of somewhat grounded feeling, and who you feel is a little torn between, you know, his responsibilities, you know, being a responsible adult, and kind of his natural curiosity about the kind of the world around him and things like this. And as the movie goes on, it kind of feathers in reveals about what's actually kind of going on. So this isn't a movie where the mission statement is right up front. So as the film goes on, you will learn the clues along with the characters in the movie. So you won't necessarily quite know where the movie is headed, and as the characters find out in the movie, you will find out as an audience. So it kind of has a little bit of a mystery feel to it. I've kind of touched on it already, but this AI that they've used to kind of lip sync the English dialogue, I gotta say, it's very impressive. You know, it's not something, you know, if you know about it, you'll kind of be looking out for it initially, but after a short time, for the most part, you'll kind of almost forget about it, and it will just kind of seem sort of natural. There's one or two instances where you kind of notice that it doesn't quite look right, but they're few and far between. I actually think it's quite impressive, to be honest with you. So it's somewhat of a groundbreaking movie with this new technology in some respects. And you know, it's a kind of like, it's hard science fiction ideas, but at the same time it's quite a kind of a light movie in some respects. So you know, it's dealing with some heady sort of subject matter and some, you know, metaphysical kind of theories and stuff, and but at the same time this movie has a sort of lighter comedic and almost sort of family friendly sort of vibe to it. So it almost is a kind of a family version of Interstellar in some regards. It's not sort of, you know, obviously as, you know, hard sci-fi as maybe that, or quite in depth, but it feels more of a you know, family orientated type kind of affair, to be honest with you. So you can kind of have this kind of lighter fun sort of touch to it. What doesn't work, the main thing for me is that there's two issues. I actually have to say, I think this movie falls into some cliches. In the movie's hurry to be like an American movie, it ends up really adopting a lot of kind of cliches that American films, you know, that they've had. There's the plot, although you don't know the specifics about where it's going, it does kind of follow a kind of a tried and tested formula. You know, we have this kind of setup, and everyone's gonna, you think you're gonna find it, and no, there's a setback, and there's an argument. It's that rom-com typical kind of like plot where they've, you know, look, at the beginning of the kind of the third act, there's this argument and people fall out, but then they kind of make up at the end and, you know, get together. It's that sort of typical kind of plot. Although you might not know the intricacies about what is, you know, the science fiction ideas, the actual way the plot is going in regards to kind of characters and stuff like that is very, very simple and obvious. Yet the other main issue I think here is, I think the characters are quite misjudged. Our main character, Denise, is one of these kind of like sort of girl boss kind of style characters. You know, she's a teenage rebellious type who happens to be some sort of genius, who joins this group and then starts kind of like bossing everyone around and things like that, and it's actually quite likable. However, the main issue I have there, she's actually quite reckless, and at multiple times in this movie she actually puts people's lives in danger, probably twice nearly killing someone, but no one ever kind of like, you know, pulls her up on it really. It's just because she's the main character, and you know, that no one actually ends up dying, so we can kind of just move past it. But she's extraordinarily reckless, and you know, I have to say, is a danger. I mean, yeah, in the movie, as I say, it's never really addressed because people are okay. But it's just like, you know, the character itself, you would think, you know, you'd be banged up. You would be locked up for the kind of the reckless things that they do. And just her attitude, there's one instance where she, her and a kind of another like female scientist tell the one guy to go and get some coffee because, you know, he's the guy and he's like he's the head sort of this UFO place, but he, you know, they sort of send him out to get coffee. And I know it's play for laughs, but again, it's this. I feel it's a little bit out of touch. I think to some degrees. There are other characters. But our main guy at this kind of UFO Sweden group is, I think, a likeable character and is quite well developed. But there are kind of like 4 other characters who are really just, you know, the caricatures. They don't get much development. They're treated like sort of stereotypical kind of nerdy types, and they don't really have any sort of personality of themselves. Really, they're just like a gelatinous kind of like nerdy sort of a bunch of stereotypes. And of course, we get the kind of the bitter old guy. And the other thing is as well is we have this police character, who I really wasn't sure the relationship between the Denise, our main character, and this female cop. And I thought initially they were sisters, but it doesn't appear to be the case. I thought, well, what is the relationship? How is, because they clearly know each other, but how? And what, you know, it's the actions of the police in this film seem erratic, to say the least, at times, and the relationship between this female police character and our main character Denise, again, it just feels like underdeveloped, and you don't really know what the relationship is or why decisions are sort of made here. And, you know, it ultimately is a little bit weak on the kind of the characters. So it has ultimately some nice visuals. There are some elements that I like about this movie, but it's a flawed film in the fact that the movie follows a kind of quite an obvious path. Its characters are quite kind of simplistic and feel out of time. They kind of feel like characters from a 90s movie. They don't feel as sophisticated for a kind of a modern film, and some of the choices here I think are misjudged. I'll give it a 5 out of 10. If you are interested in a kind of a family feeling Interstellar, then I would check it out. Or if you're a huge fan of the kind of the X-Files, it has that sort of discovery kind of feel to it, but it's really hampered by, I think, some poorly judged characters. 5 out of 10 for me. Have you seen it? Would you see it? Let me know what your thoughts are.